This was by far the hardest critique I have done to date. What gives a painting life? What makes a painting lifeless? I got this cry for help from Mick Ruellen, if I pronounced that right, where he sent in this landscape painting and he said, my painting seems a bit bland, no sparkle, I'm a bit lost. And I just resonated with that. I think we all struggle with this. We get inspired by something, we see something, we want to get it out and let other people resonate with what we're feeling. And it's clear that in this painting, he's trying to make this more than the photograph that he took. He saw something there and he wanted to capture it, and he's moving along. You can see he's doing a great job, but he just can't quite get there. He can't quite capture that life and expression that inspired him to make this painting in the first place. And so I wanted to take a stab at this, try to simplify how can we give life to a painting in a way that is objective and applicable. That's not just, oh, have more emotion or expression as you work. Like, that's not really actionable. So how can we objectively give more life to a painting? Is it adding more colors? Well, not really. I mean, I'm sure you've seen plenty of overly saturated photographs that just, no. Got high contrast? No, not really. There's plenty of elegant paintings that have a very low contrast. Bold brushstrokes, that's not really it either. You don't have to have bold brushstrokes in order to give life to a painting. Maybe a good answer would be more depth, but even then I don't think that quite encapsulates everything. If I had to boil it down to two words, I would say right relationships. A piece of art is comprised of relationships. You've got this value against that value, this hard edge against that soft edge. You've got complementary colors, and we want to create a piece of art where all of the relationships are playing off of each other and they're linking up together in a way that unifies them, and then in other ways that pulls them away, like this beautifully choreographed dance, and it just ebbs and flows. And as you're looking at it, your own eyes, your mind, your soul is beginning to dance along with that work of art. That's a piece of art full of life. So then the next question is, how do we go about creating these relationships that comprehensively breathes life into a piece of art? You have to understand how these relationships work, how they function, and what effect that they're going to have, a soft edge versus a hard edge, and how that's going to play off of one thing or another. And then on top of that, you're going to need to know what relationships are more important than others, because there's a lot of fluff out there, a lot of things that will get lost in the weeds on things like texture. Texture is not as important as the overall encompassing nature of edges. There are many things that we can get lost in, relationships that are not as influential or as impactful. This is why in the Evolve method, we've simplified this painting process down into those few simple relationships that have the greatest impact on a piece of art. Relationships that lay the foundation from which all other relationships can be built on top of. You can make 100 categories for these relationships and get lost in the 97 of them that just don't really make a difference. So focusing in on the relationships that matter and knowing how they function and what effect they're going to have, that's the beginning. Let's dive deep into what relationships we can focus on to give life to this piece of art. There is going to be some subjectivity that's going to creep into here. I'm going to be making some assumptions on where Mick was trying to take his painting, so there is going to be a little bit of that, but I do want you to understand that the tools that I will be using will be based on these principles, these objective, if I do this, I will get this effect, very cause and effect, very technical, analytical, and I want you to see that as I'm making changes to this painting in my own attempt to give it life. Let's start with our first relationship. The first thing that we do in Evolve is break our image down mentally, visually, into two parts, light and shadow. This reference image is almost entirely lit. This means that the relationship between light and shadow practically doesn't exist. This is the number one reason why I would say your painting is bland, Mick. You are working with an image that leaves out the most influential relationship that could be had in a realistic or impressionistic painting. Our eyes register information by light and a lack of it, and having both light and shadow helps our eyes easily understand the three-dimensional form of something. And look at the masters. They gave light and shadow so much attention, you could even say that light is the subject, not just the object that they were painting. It is so crucial, and it lays the groundwork for everything else. Looking at your painting, I can see that you tried to bring out the light and shadow, looking at that hit of yellow on the wall and in the clouds. So I'm going to continue to move in that direction. Mind you, we are now departing from the reference image, recreating our own light source. This is not easy to invent on your own without the right knowledge and experience. So if you want to be able to paint freely and confidently enough to do this, then check out Evolve or send us a message and we'll help you out. In any case, if you're using a reference, make sure you choose a reference that is already capturing a nice relationship between light and shadow. You will save so much time. It will become a whole lot easier for you to work with a reference that's already pointing you in the right direction, especially for a relationship that's so important as this one. And I don't just want to talk about, creating relationships in order to make something realistic. We're talking about giving life to a painting. Our eyes gravitate to light. They become focal points in the painting, and the things that you choose to light are the things that our eyes are going to pay attention to and take notice of, while the shadows are going to hold the painting together like the beat of a drum. So I changed the light source around. I brought in this yellow light that's a little bit lower, and it's raking across the mountain to get some shadows in there. So you got light, shadow, light, shadow. You have that in the wall as well, and then I even let some of that yellow light kind of go over the surface of the water, and I decided that by the time we get to the wave in front, then that wave and everything below it is in shadow. And so these are subjective decisions. I decided to move the light around in that way, and I thought that would look nice. But understand that what I've created is a more dynamic relationship between light and shadow that's more easy to see, and that part is objective. You could change the light source, you could move it in a different direction and still come out with a beautiful painting that's full of life. This is what I decided to do to create my light and shadow relationships. Now that we know what our light and shadow is, we can make educated decisions on the next three relationships. So now we're at values. So we want to make sure that our shadows are relatively darker than our lights. And you heard that word relative. There's relationships again. I also know that low contrast will push things back. It'll create more depth. Then high contrast is going to pull forward. It's going to catch our eyes. It's going to grab our attention. When we create a little bit of something around a lot of nothing, so if we create high contrast in an area where there's low contrast, we're going to have a relationship. We're going to have a jumping back and forth. We're going to have life, movement, things that are happening. And I'm also going to be careful to stay within a range of values to maintain cohesiveness. Again, we've talked about establishing some unity where everything is making sense within the environment that this whole setting is in. So you can see here I've increased my contrast so much everywhere that this painting is just falling apart. It's falling to pieces. There's nothing holding it together. Anyways, let's move on to the third relationship, edges. Edges are how soft or sharp one thing bumps up against another. Soft edges will fall back, hard edges will pull forward, so we can use those relationships to create the effects that we want. Now, if you look at this painting, Mick did a phenomenal job with his edges. Look at how all of the things that are up front have sharper edges. They're in focus. They're right in front of us. And then the things that are in the back are already nice and soft in relation to the things up front. The only thing I would say is that that horizon line where the water is just a little too sharp. I don't think we want people's eyes to be gravitating to that spot until we've already looked at the wave, the rock, the hill, the water coming up along the shore, and then they can go and take a look at that horizon line. So I would say either the edge is too sharp or the value is too dark and bringing too much attention there. But in any case, Mick has done a phenomenal job in this area, and I really didn't touch my edges at all. Just at the very end, I made some tweaks. Now let's see what we can do with color. You notice that I used a yellow light when I was establishing my light and shadow relationships. My lights in this painting are warm, and my shadows are cool. And there's a relationship again. And I also know that more vivid color is going to catch our attention. So I'm going to drop in more color into the wave in front. I'm actually, because the rock is up front and it already has really sharp edges, I'm actually going to diminish both its color and its value. Again, this is ultimately in shadow. I know there's a lot of ambient light going around, but I'm going to diminish it in color because the value and the edges are already strengthening up that rock in front. But for the hill, I'm going to continue to use that yellow light and shadow relationship going on because my edges are not as strong and my value range is more limited. So I'm relying on color in here to create a dynamic relationship. By the time I got to this point, I realized that I needed to put in some shadows on the backside of the clouds because I had changed my light source. And then because I had worked on the hill so much and creating the light and shadow and all the different colors, I realized I needed to increase some of the edges in there, give a little bit more information to pull it more forward. So I'm just sloppily throwing this stuff on here. Again, I'm not trying to make a highly realistic painting or outdo anyone here. I'm just trying to use objective principles to breathe life into this painting and show you the effect that they have. So I'm going to give a recap and synthesize all of these relationships together. So first, let's look at this wave that's cresting. That is a big focal point of this painting, and so I have given it high contrast, sharp edges, and vivid color. So that's three relationships that, compared to everything else in this painting, is helping our viewers' eyes gravitate towards. So if we look now down to the rock on the right side, this is in front. I do want people to be aware of it, but I don't want them to focus all of their attention on it, right? So for this one, I have given it somewhat muted values, pretty muted colors, but I've given it sharp edges to help pull it forward. Or I should say, Mick created those edges. And you can see that there is actually a value jump where that rock meets the frothing water. And then when we look in the back where that wall is, we have somewhat limited value, we have diminished edges, so a little bit softer edges, and then a color relationship that's helping give it life. So you can see how I'm using all of these relationships together to create different effects in different ways, and these things begin to dance and intermingle with each other in beautiful ways. It creates dynamism. The painting is no longer monotonous, and you have these relationships that are existing and that are pulling and playing with each other. And by the way, this is blowing my mind right now. Like, we are actually using these simple, practical, actionable things to breathe life into this painting. And we could breathe life into this painting in so many ways based on these principles, and this is just the way that I've gone about doing it. It's insane. And look what happens when I turn the dial up and increase my contrast in my colors for the lights. Boom. So I'll say it again. Knowing what relationships matter and how they function and interact with each other is the key to consistently being able to breathe life into a piece of art, and so much more. To paint whatever you want. Whatever you want to create, you can create because you understand those essential components to the visual world that we live in. It blows my mind. So coming back to the critique here, Mick, you did a great job with this painting. I was actually surprised when you messaged me saying that your painting was bland and had no sparkle and that you were a bit lost, because you had already elevated this painting well above the photograph that you were using, and I think you were fighting that photograph the whole way through. Again, there was no real relationship between light and shadow, and so that was a huge barrier for you in bringing life to this painting. I can see that you brought more vibrancy into the waves. I see that you used a lot of principles to create depth in the back on that hill, and even just with your edges, being conscious of all that. You did great. It was really just the light and shadow. For you, I would just say, make sure that you are using reference with great light and shadow, or if you're not using a reference, then make sure that you understand how light and shadow works so that you can create it yourself. You can't really bring out life without giving some room for death. We can't really define life without having an understanding of death, in the same way that we don't really understand what light is without first knowing that everything is in shadow without it. There's a warmth and clarity that happens in light. And we know that warmth by the chill that we felt when the sun drops behind a cloud. So light is life. Color is life. But you need the counteracting component to those things to bring them out. So there's like this yin and yang thing that's going on in painting. So relationships, right relationships, relationships that sync up together and work together. You can't just create whatever relationships that you want, because then you're going to have a big kaleidoscope of a mess on your hands. You're just going to have chaos. You need order and chaos. Like, again, like, we don't know what chaos is without the order, right? So we need the order and the chaos. We need the life and the death. We need the light and the shadow, the color and the grayness, the sharp edge and the softness. All of these things playing together to just create this beautiful symphony. It's amazing. And it's the beauty of making art. It's truly mind-blowing. Like, if your mind isn't blown by this stuff, then you either really understand it really well to the point that it's boring for you, or you just haven't been able to break through and understand how all of these things work together. And if you don't have that, then seek understanding. Go to Evolve, look around, find this information and gain a foundation through a lens through which you can view the world, process information, and then recreate it in the way that resonates with your soul and with other people. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I think there could be amazing discussions about this relationship thing, how these things play off each other, the things that you've learned in creating life into work. Like, what is your motivation for painting? I think that's come out in me a lot in this video. Like, I've been sharing a lot about where I really find life in painting. Let's just open up a dialogue and talk about this. How do you give life to a painting? There's so many ways to do it, and there's so many answers, and I would love to hear you guys' thoughts. I need to stop talking and get so fired up about this. If you're getting fired up too, then send me a message and let's just bond over this. I'd love that. Or if you're looking for more information, you want to improve your skills, go to evolveartist.com. And yeah, these are so much fun. I love all of your participation in this. Thank you so much, and stay tuned for Open Art Critique number 7.